the webinars are, we're undertaking is probably about 10 at least, if not more, over the next year. And the idea was to share some of the projects that are happening from around the province, but specifically how we could open up more dialogue around putting tools in the hands of young people, but also having them see how what they're doing in a classroom translates into a trade and a career. Today's a little bit different because normally this would be led by somebody who is in the trade themselves, but we thought with everything that's happening in the world, we would also show this approach, and I'm not going to spoil it, so I'll let Dean and Adia and Renee talk to it. So this session's about an hour. If you have questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat. And there will be time as we go to jump in and heckle us. It is a familiar audience, so I'm assuming heckling will commence at any moment. But yeah, so without further ado, I'm going to hand over. Oh, I forgot to do the important part too. Yeah, so this project is a collaboration with the ITA, their youth department, and I see Jason's here. Yeah, so and thanks to them for making all this possible. Yeah, I'm gonna hand it over to Renee.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you, Jordan. So, all right. I always get nervous with Zoom when all of a sudden there's some kind of an alert that flashes up on the screen. I immediately think I've done something wrong. So, but I think all is well. So, let me begin this session by saying that the Construction Foundation of British Columbia is grateful to the many First Nations that have called this land home for thousands of years and on whose traditional territories we work. So before we get started, so the session will be led by Adia, who hello Adia, great to see you again.
Nice to see you.
But at the same time, we're going to, it'll feel a little bit like a conversation because we'll go back and forth naturally. Dean Heron, who's with us as well, will speak to some of the different aspects of the materials and maybe give a context for the project. In my opinion, it does lend itself to going in different directions, and you. When working with young people, depending on the age as well, and you know which class it's fitting into, you can sort of dwell on certain aspects of it longer, or just touch on and let people perhaps explore on their own at their own pace. So I don't want to get into it too deeply, but I'm going to turn it over to Adia to introduce the project itself, and then I think Dean can come in and talk to the materials. If that does that make sense? We handle it that way.
For sure. Do you want me to like start too, or should we just do?
Yeah, I think you should start. That should be fine. I think this will be like a conversational.
Okay. Yeah, and talk over me too.
No, perfect. Yeah.
Okay. So hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us and welcoming me to this awesome webinar. So I'm super stoked to get working on this project. So my company is Billywood Design. So I am a self-taught woodworker and artist, and I primarily work with just reclaimed and recycled wood. So everything from skateboards and scrap pieces to, you know, offcuts and stuff like that from other woodworkers. So I definitely love a bit of a challenge too. So I'm going to show you what we're going to make. Let me know if you can't hear me or have any questions or anything. I tried to set it up so that you could kind of see the space in the area, and hopefully you can see what I'm doing a little bit, but I can definitely like bring stuff to zoom in a little bit closer to the camera. So Renee came up with these awesome designed cedar boxes, and they have a bottom on them and some nice strips for your feet. So the one workshop I did with him and Sheila, it was great to see it come together and actually see some students put it together and make it. And sometimes, you know, you never know how the kids are gonna do with it. And when they're kind of given this you know, the pieces that are a little bit pre-cut and you can see what you get to make. It was cool to see how fast they put it all together too. I think that was a really inspiring part of it, where it's like, oh, even if you kind of didn't have a ton of attention to put into it, it didn't take that long to be able to walk away with like this awesome piece that you didn't have to explain. It's pretty cool to say, hey, I made this, and you know, went from first time using a drill to actually get to show something you made. So we can start on it right away. If anybody has any questions or anything like that, let me know. So we have these, I don't know, Renee, do you share the template or anything like that?
So this project we have on the Skills Ready project portal.
Okay.
Jordan, maybe you could pull that up. We have a template there, and it's a little different than the one that what we did. The workshop that Adia was referencing was done in a back alley just off of Hastings, with some folded tables and under a pop-up. So not exactly, woodworking class setup, but this can be done anywhere. We've done it in parks and outside of schools during COVID time. So it is a very versatile project. But anyway, there's the basic outlines, and it's fairly easy to modify. Maybe, you know what, maybe we could just before we get into the building, perhaps, because the material that's here is red cedar, and that's the material I've mostly used. It can be done obviously with fir or with other materials, but for a whole host of reasons, I think cedar makes the most sense. So perhaps, Dean, could you maybe speak to the materials that it's made from?
Oh, sure. Yeah, thank you very much there, Renee. Good afternoon. My name is Dean Heron. I'm Kaska Tlingit First Nation from Watson Lake, Yukon, member of the Wolf Clan, adopted into Wiikinuck First Nation of Owakino, or Rivers Inlet, into the House of Watkas and the Five-Finned Kilauea Clan. And my traditional name is Kwaksayu. And I am an artist by trade. I've been doing art now for 30 years. And cedar is probably one of my favorite materials to work with, that and alder. So it's really actually fantastic that we're using reclaimed red cedar here for this project. It can be reclaimed, or you can actually support a local sawmill if you wish. But the red cedar, the yellow cedar woods were traditionally used up and down the coast. The red cedar in particular, if you've ever had the chance to go into like a cathedral grove type of forest where the large cedars grow, I had a chance to go through New Hulk territory and the New Hulk Valley with Alvin Mack, who's one of their master artists there. And he was showing us some of the old, still standing old growth red cedar groves. And he was showing us actually things that had happened a couple hundred years ago, where they would be splitting the red cedar right from the tree itself, but leave it standing so that it could keep growing. The red cedars grow so huge. They're up to 230 feet. They're 14 feet in the diameter for a nice big size one. And the West Coast people would use them for canoes and for houses. And for boxes. So if you take a look at some of the boxes and paddles as well, I have a small yellow cedar box here. It's a steamed bentwood box. And they would use red cedar. I got a red cedar one here as well, but it's in a canoe bowl form. It's red cedar, and what they would put their regalia and some of their precious items in there for feasting into these boxes, and the mice don't like getting into them because it splinters quite a bit. So they know that their regalia and some of their precious items would be stored safely in them. They would use these kind of boxes for all types of things. You can see this type of one here. It's actually a canoe bentwood box, so that it's steamed not at 90 degrees, but at 23.5. You can see the difference between them. And the way it was shaped when you put it into your canoe, if your canoe would tip, it would actually not come out, so you wouldn't lose your favorite fishing gear. And yellow cedar, same thing. It's a little bit more tightly grained. They would use it for mostly for paddles and model poles that they would trade up and down the coast. Because of the tight grain, it was actually they would fire one of the sides, so they would actually heat treat it to put a temper into it, just like you would with metal. And it would actually allow the paddle to last a little bit longer. And you can see in some of the collections that we've seen around down in New Zealand, here in the Royal BC Museum, and over in Europe, there are examples of full size paddles. These are just little mini ones that we do for another project, but they're carved really nicely with their clan symbols on them. And they're also fired with a temper into them. So you can actually study some of the old pieces itself. So that's a little bit of history behind the cedars that we're using.
Very cool. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, so you can definitely tell, like, it's got that nice cedar smell too, for sure. So if you have a chance to check out the templates and stuff, basically this design has 12 kind of pre-cut panels that should all be the same size, and these will measure up your walls on here. And then you should have 4 of the bars for the top and bottom, which are slightly longer than the 4 for the opposite sides. Then a couple bottom panels, which we'll see if they fit. And then 2 of the boards for the bottom for your feet. So Renee brought up a good point yesterday about, you know, you can kind of use whatever you have too, but you know, when you're putting it together and stuff like that, it's super handy to have a few things just in case, because a lot of times when we're measuring out stuff, it's not always the exact, or, you know, if your template's a little bit off and stuff like that. So being open to, you know, adjust a little bit as you build is a really good attitude to go into it. So having like a little handsaw and some extra tools or things like that always help. And then when working with wood, you know, there's always knots and grains that you kind of look out for. So you might get a little bit of splitting or different things like that that you might have to adjust a little bit too. So, but usually it's pretty forgiving. And I do feel like anything you make out of wood is always going to turn out beautiful. So, you know, if you go into it with that intention, and also you're making it yourself, so of course it's going to be awesome. So yeah, I'm super excited. Renee made this awesome little square board as your workstation too, which I actually think is an awesome tip for any projects or anything like that. When, especially when you're working with kids and stuff, usually you have these plastic folding tables. So it's nice to have a little workstation or a piece of plywood to put everything on if you're doing any kind of nailing or screwing your stuff, and then it just gives you a bit of a flat base as well. But also if you kind of accidentally go through anything, it's not a big deal. So we can just go ahead and start. So we'll start building our side panels. So you're going to do 2 with the longer top and bottom, and then 2 with the shorter ones. And a lot of these boards too will have like a nicer side and a bit rougher, so you can kind of choose which one you want on the outside and which one you want on the inside. I don't think it really matters, but some people are a little bit more particular. So yeah, I don't know. So I'll just start screwing them. Something that was kind of interesting too, which you know, you never really think about if you're used to using tools, is some people actually have never had a chance to use a screw or your screwdriver or anything like that. And so even just playing around with, you know, how fast it goes and stuff like that can be, you know, an interesting new thing that they try. So I always suggest that too, if you've never used a drill, to kind of feel if it's like, you know, how fast it's going to go in and stuff like that. So play around with it a little bit before you start drilling in. So this one's going to overhang a little bit on both. Got the right bit in there, it should be perfect fit. Maybe I don't. Yeah. I love this little Bosch one too, because it's nice and small and light. But I can mute it too if it's super annoying to listen to.
No, not at all.
Chat or whatever too.
One of the things one of the questions that often comes up is like, what age can you do this kind of project with? And I think, Renee, you've done this with groups as young as grade 6.
I think, yeah, grade 6 and right up to grade 12. So I've done this with a bunch of, and actually with adults. I've done this with, alt programs. The one thing, unfortunately, is the cost of lumber has gone up dramatically. And even shopping around, when I first did this, I went, to Standard Building Supplies, and I got, clear stuff, and it's just too prohibitive now. I just had a look at Home Depot in Rona. Yeah, that's that's another idea, which is to reuse wood. Obviously that's attractive from the price perspective, but there is a little bit of a downside with the reusing, that typically like a fence like that is 15, 20 years old. It's you've got to cut out the sections that are already too far gone. So there is a more of a labor component to reusing wood, but it's a nice idea. The cedar is rot resistant, so even reusing boards like this, you've still got several years of life in there, and that the skirting boards there are obviously new. So that is an alternative. I just priced out the costs, and it'd be roughly $22, $23 for the cedar if you were to buy new for one planter at the moment. Obviously, there's some fasteners and a few other things to consider, but if you were to price it at $25, I think that would cover it, which that makes it a little bit on the pricey side for doing a whole class.
Is there a big difference between how you do this with younger groups as how you do with older? Like, do you pre-drill anything, or how do you do the prep?
That is a good question. I've got one kit here that's left over from, and I don't know if you can see this, but I pre-drilled ahead of time, and especially when they get drier, that's useful. Or if you use fir, I think that's a good way to go. If you were doing this with people that have some familiarity, a bit more background, then I think I've got a piece of 1x4 over there. Give them the full lengths and let them do the layout work and all of that. So you could turn this into a much more detailed project, or as Adia said, something that could comfortably be done with a dozen or 15 kids in, how long did that take us there at the Aries program? Do you remember?
I want to say it was like an hour and a half, but like some kids for sure don't even need an hour. It seemed like they were super fast. So, and then you get into the anything else you add onto the box after, but yeah, I feel like there's definitely, and then other kids probably took longer and maybe had more questions or needed a bit more guidance, but yeah, I felt like it was definitely like a great project that you don't need a ton of time set out for, except the prep beforehand for sure. Yeah, that's another thing actually, just Renee, when you talk about material costs and stuff like that, I realize that's a huge hurdle for a lot of groups and stuff like that when you're wanting to do these kind of projects. It's you know, it can stop you. You can have this awesome idea and everybody's gung ho, but it's super hard when you need to try and come up with the money and things like that. So I don't know if it's like, there are some ways to kind of do it as a group where you do one box with 2 kids. I think that would be, you know, because you could take turns doing things, or one prep stuff and things like that. And then another option is just, yeah, salvaging materials and stuff. That's a huge time thing though. You know, you have to definitely be okay with using different materials that might not always match or things like that. But even just in my industrial area kind of alleyway here, there's a ton of different shops that have all the stacks of different pallets and stuff like that. And I've regularly gone to them and just asked if I can take a few, and then I'll just cut them up and use just the strips and stuff like that, which for a project like this, you could definitely use, but it would take a bit of prep and you definitely end up with like nail holes and stuff like that, which I mean, I don't mind that, but, or you paint them or do something else, but it's another option or way if you have the time that you can like maybe incorporate that, the salvaging part into part of the project or things like that, and stretch it out for a little bit longer if you have the time.
Good point. Okay. So yeah, I think Sally, if I recall at your school, we did one box for 2, didn't we? I don't know, is Sally still there?
There with the hat on. I'm here.
Yeah, so I can't recall. Did because those planters stayed at the school.
Yeah.
I know the kids worked in pairs, but did they end up making one planter for each pair? Is that how it worked? I can't recall.
Yeah, it was one planter for 2 kids, and then we kept them at school, and they're still there, and they still have plants in them, flowers in them, and they look great.
Okay, and that's already a few years ago.
Yeah, and I made one when I came home, which I sent you the picture of with the flowers in, which I was very proud of. But the kids wanted them, but because there was only one per 2 kids, we left them at the school.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, you know, that's the downside when you do it, then it's, you know, where does it go?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They loved it though, it was good.
Randy, do you have some thoughts on that, on projects that end up being, you know, because of the cost that you can't sort of send it home with each student?
It's, if the kids make it, it's pretty tough not letting them take home a project because they won't want to do anything with you again after that. So you really have to figure out how to get the materials and do all that prep, and the kids will have a really good experience. But I'm sort of wondering though, is looking at this, that is a cool little project. Lots of schools sometimes don't like using cedar, but in this case, you're not sanding it and all that kind of stuff, so there's no dust. So I like that. But I'm just wondering if somehow we could be broadening out to the community where maybe there's retired people or somebody that's willing to do the prep, getting all the pieces cut. Because I like the way Andy's ideas got their little jig there and then working with it. That's really cool for the kids. But there's a lot of prep for a teacher but the community might be able to come together and define the donated materials and then put on, you know, the workshop. So we need to branch out somehow.
Mm-hmm.
Sally, at RJDS, I recall there were a couple of grandparents that came in and helped out.
Yes, there's a lot of people that we can get to prep it. We have a lot of parent help too. For their PPP hours, they could be doing that for us too. It's no trouble to get all that prep work done.
I got a question for Dean. Just, you know, looking at these little cedar boxes, just bringing in a bit of an indigenous component to it. Is it possible to make a bit of that chipping effect on the cedar, just like a traditional, you know, longhouse boards and stuff like that, where they use an adze or a chip? But have you ever made something like that where they actually put a little texture on the outside?
in the post-secondary courses that I taught at Coast Mountain College, I did, and you can certainly, if you feel comfortable, and it depends on the comfortability and the age of your students. Certainly the higher grades, if you sort of get into grade 8, 9, 10 and upwards, even a straight knife, you will be able to put texture on that board. There are different types of knives that you can use.
That'd be kind of cool if Renee or something, if Dean had some pictures of the different types of tools that were used, and then also a little bit of a picture of what that does to the wood or what you can do with the wood. Because anytime you can get a bit of that value added or stretch out the time, if you go to a little bit senior grades, then that would mean that if it costs $25 for a box, if you can stretch it out so that it's a week project instead of a one-day project, then sometimes you can handle it. Oh, I like the idea of the bent box ideas too.
Oh yeah, you could just demonstrate on a bent box. It's a box that's going to be turned into this.
Yeah.
It's curved, pre-curved, and then you're able to steam and bend it. But when you're talking about doing texture, you can, and maybe we can talk about it, Jordan, just with the lending tool library that we have. We do have bent knives just like this.
Yeah.
We just published a book on how to make these knives, looking at something that's going to turn into sort of a year-long project where you make tools or you borrow some tools from our library. And then probably with this part here, if you want to put texture into it, it's a really great idea. It's really quite simple. It's just making small little cuts across the board itself. This particular Benwood box I'm going to be doing, I wanted to put texture in anyway, so this is a perfect time to be able to do it. And it's really, what I would probably suggest is actually talking with the local artists that you might already have a relationship through the school, or looking for an artist in the community that you would like to talk to. Most artists would be happy to come in and be with kids to demonstrate different techniques. You can do it with a little bent knife like that. In the bigger planks in the houses, traditionally you'd be using an adze, just like this, like an elbow adze, or even better yet, a D-adze, which is not quite as big, but does a really nice fine job with creating that texture on there. And certainly, now that we're sitting there talking about it, some of the projects that we've created the videos to go along with them. So perhaps maybe we can do a short demonstration on how to create texture on red cedar.
Cool.
That would be a great addition. I think the kids would love that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great idea. Yeah, so you can see the video that Jordan's putting up. We've created all kinds of different videos on how to. So like I said, we have 15 different projects, from making tools to creating spoons, creating canoe bowls, paddles. Some of the techniques are in there.
That's really cool.
I think at this point too, it's worth mentioning. So a lot of this was developed with First Nation schools in mind. So the 132 on nation-owned schools, and as we go, we're going to put out more information about it. But as a follow-up to this session, we'll send out information on both the Cedar project and the Indigenous Skills book as well. I'm just going to pause now, and because we're on the topic, before handing it back to Adia, who miraculously I think got 400 screws in that Cedar box in 5 minutes. And so part of what we did with the Indigenous Skills book and with the website is we have a mirror to the project's website. So I'm going to share just a draft of what that looks like. So this is the project's website that you'll be well familiar with now, which does have that the wooden box, or the planter box here. And then we've mirrored it with the Indigenous Skills Project website. So there's 15 projects coming here. This is the paddle pendant that Dean referenced. And just before we move on, Dean, is there anything that you wanted to identify around kind of content engagement or working with the materials?
With with what regard there, Jordan? With
Oh, sorry, with like with bringing the projects into schools or because there's a bunch of different projects there. We're looking at 15, I think you created in total. Half of those are tool making.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we did what we really wanted to create was like a full suite so that students could make a knife and then carve a project. And the projects range from something that like the paddle pendant, like I'm wearing right here, something really easily done with primary students in grades kindergarten and up. All they'll really need to use is sandpaper to finish off a project, because we prep the kit in a way that the young students they don't have to handle knives. So when you start going up into grades, you can actually start using a straight knife to finish it off. And then what we ask or suggest to do is actually talk to an artist in the community that they can come in and teach local design. Northwest Coast art, Coast Salish art, they're all from different communities. So they're actually different in style and how you would paint and how the designs would come together. As far as going up into other specialty things like the Benwood boxes, there's specific artists that can do bending of those kind of projects. So you really need to talk to somebody like Peter Wayne Gong, who actually submitted the project for the book. He's been doing bending of boxes for probably about 5 years now, and he's become very proficient, where a lot of artists like myself throughout the province actually go to him to buy the box, so that we can skip that step.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, I'm just cognizant of the time. We're at 4:05 here, and so I'm going to turn it back to Adia.
Right. So yeah, basically you saw how fast that was. So we've got all our walls, screwed them all together, and everything looks like it fits so far, which is great. So now we're gonna put our 2 feet on, and then basically put the floor on, and then we can get on to the next step. Yeah, so another thing that, you kind of figure out as you're building and stuff, and Renee brought it up, for the bottom, you can use anything, but it's nice to use something a little bit wider so it's not so tippy, and kind of positioning them a little bit towards the sides instead of the center. And in working with wood and stuff, you kind of figure it out, but when you're screwing really close to the edge and stuff like that, sometimes it can split or things like that. So if it's beyond salvageable, then it's nice to have extra spare pieces on hand and stuff like that. So that always comes in handy. And if you don't have them, you'll need them. If you have them, you won't use them.
So are you screwing it into the skirting board there, or into the actual walls?
The walls. What did you do?
Yeah, no, I think that's what I did as well. So not putting it too and pointing that out to the kids that you not go right out to the end.
Show you how much space you have. Yeah, so you can kind of see, you can gauge, because you have your guides, because you don't have your floor in yet. But if you do it too close, it's definitely going to split. So it's nice to pull them in a little bit. And then another thing too, depending on your stuff, if you have just a little drill bit or something too, sometimes that can be handy if you're finding your wood is splitting a lot. And when you're putting your screws in, you can slow down, go a little slower, and that can help. But also pre-drilling little holes. It doesn't have to be a huge hole or the same size of the screw, but that definitely helps too. It gives it a guide, and then usually it won't split if you do that. So but it adds a bit more time, because then you're putting holes in each one along with putting the screw in. So if you're short on tools too, then you're kind of taking up a lot of time if everybody's sharing stuff too, which might be trickier. There's our feet. And these are some boards for the bottom. And they're too long. Let's try these ones. Oh my gosh, it fits. So those, because they're not going to really, you just throw in a couple screws in the bottom just to hold them on to your feet, so you can kind of gauge, do it a little bit close to here. Let me see if I can pull one out so you can see. You're going to be screwing 3 little boards onto the feet that you just put in.
So you could also do that as a separate panel, right? And then insert it. If you're working in pairs, then you can sort of, somebody can put their hand and just give a little bit of push back, and then it's easier to screw. But if you're doing it by yourself, it's a little trickier to do, I think.
Right. And also just even sometimes getting your drill inside and the angles and stuff like that can be tricky. So doing it separate and then sliding it in is probably.
I think that's why we had them in pairs, Renee. Remember, we decided that they could help each other and it was easier for them because these kids were grade 7.
Right.
Sorry to interrupt.
And it is the material is soft. I always bring I always bring a few screwdrivers along because it's actually easy enough to screw in yourself. And if you bring a little stubby, then you can kind of get into those tight spaces. It's again, it's just a little bit slower, but anytime that you get the kids sort of interacting, and then they can actually hear the wood, as you're screwing in it, that as it goes, or if it starts to crack, then they'll hear it right away, and then they can ease off, and they're just getting to to work with a living, after all, wood it's a living material.
I think this is maybe a good time to mention, I'm not sure if we're going to get through the metal plate as well, but one of the ways that we've used this project before is to talk about kind of a couple of different trades. Because with, well, I'll just kick it back to you, Renee, for that.
Well,
we're done.
There we are. Well, in this case, we have a Dia who's the whole sort of philosophy behind her work is the use of reclaimed materials, right? Reusing materials. And so I think it lends itself to talking about entrepreneurship and jewelry making, and then if you have a tradesperson who's got a different background, a carpenter, you can easily go in that direction, and you can talk maybe a little bit more about the qualities of where do we use cedar today, in decks and handrails and so on, where it's rot resistance and stands up well against the weather, and fences and such. So I think there's if you bring into the conversation what comes naturally, the person at hand, so that they can speak from their own experience. And I think the kids do really well with that authenticity. And there's obviously there's different elements. It's interesting, Dean brought in yellow cedar, and yellow cedar has, as Randy I'm sure can attest, uses in boat building. So you can weave in natural extensions, and there's plenty of career aspects that you can touch on. So
sorry, I was talking and then it was muted. One of the other things, I'm not going to put Don Cameron and Darcy on the spot too much, but one of the things I heard in what they were sharing last week about the projects they were taking on in the schools in Saanich was this idea of parent volunteers, and how sometimes doing these kind of projects brought in either parents who are also tradespeople or just parents in general to kind of help out. So one of the I think one of the things that I really like about this project is the accessibility of it, but also that ability to say, like, here's a few different trades in a box, quite literally. I don't, the pun was funnier in my head than outside of my head, I guess.
Oh, I just get it now.
Yeah.
For sure. I think those are always, so when I one of the very first times I did this, one of the volunteers, believe it or not, had a blacksmithing background, and that's where the kind of like the metal idea, because I wanted to find some way to bring his expertise to bear, so it wasn't just an extra pair of hands, although that was very welcome, but so that he could do something and then speak about his own career pathway, and which was really cool. You know, blacksmith, you don't encounter those very often. So what we came up with was to take a little bit of refrigeration tubing, some copper tubing, and a little bit of ground wire. In this case, it came from a ground cable, but this comes out of 14-2 wire as well. You could strip off, and then, you know, I'm sorry, this is as artistic as I get. And then you can slip it in and then solder it together, so that they had a chance to have a torch in their hand, do a tiny little bit of soldering. Then you could speak to the use of, in this case, copper, in different trades. And they, this is just a decorative element, right? We filled it up with dirt. We'll talk about that in a moment, what we planted in there. And then they just put this in as a, some of them made beautiful butterflies and flowers, and some spelled out their names. It's kind of a cool little add-on piece.
Very cool. Yeah, I did a little plate. So I don't know if that's part of the thing that you shared, the plans, but I don't know if you can see. So with just super easy, just etched a design onto the plate, and then you can pre-drill your holes and mount it onto the side too. It's not adding any torching, but it's still kind of fun to do something with a little Dremel tool too. Just super safe to use, and I feel like most people feel comfortable using that one as well.
Then is that brass? What's that, the material?
I'm assuming this is what you dropped off.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, there's different materials that you could use. Okay, I wasn't sure if that was one of mine. Somehow you transformed it into a beautiful piece of artwork.
Well, I feel like that kind of thing is something that's supposed to be squiggly, because it's really tricky to do a perfect line without a template. So it'll make it. But yeah, kids will always come up with something way cooler anyway. So
yeah, it's true, and then it is very personalized then.
Totally. And I like the idea of having something else that maybe, some kids might spend, a lot of time doing the box building. Other kids, that part of it was a lot more their style or something. And also it lets you be a little bit more creative too, because you're coming up with your own idea and have a little bit more freedom in what you want to do with it. So I think adding that too is always a great part of a project. And it also can give a little bit more freedom to fill up the time, or or not.
Mm-hmm.
Extra step.
True enough. So
Renee was asking me as well earlier, a couple of days ago, just about using some copper elements. And I do have a plate of copper here, and I'm just going to change my video really quickly here. And we're talking about just sort of motifs from Northwest Coast design. These are just little elements of U-forms. Renee was talking about, he was asking me about a shield shape, which was one of these things here. And I was talking about, it's a really great way to talk about culture. And it's about bringing in, like I said, an artist from a community, and you can talk about these shapes and what they mean. And I'll give you a really quick story if we have time. It'll probably take about 4 minutes or so. I'll do a real quick version. It won't be the day-long story that goes along with it, but it actually, these shape here came from a place called Yakutat, which is up in Alaska Panhandle. And it was a story of a young chieftain boy who really liked another chieftain girl in the village. And it was a no-no for them to actually have a relationship. And he was banished from the territory. So the chiefs got together and said that you need to leave. And really was a way of punishment. So you either were put to death in those days, or you were actually banished from the village and you were on your own in the forest. And what he ended up doing, he ended up climbing a mountain called Mount Edgecombe. And he prepared his camp. He was going to settle down for the winter time, and he knew he actually wasn't going to make it. But during dream time, he was visited by an eagle. And the eagle said, "You're not going to die. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a special kind of rock that's from this mountain. And what you need to go do is build a fire tomorrow and make it a really big fire. And I'll show you where the rocks are." And it was it was a copper rock, which had already been anodized to the blue-green color that you might see in art, especially from the Haida, the Tlingit, the Tsimshian, the Nisga'a people. And when he put this rock onto the fire, it changed form. And the eagle told him to pound it out into different shapes. And he ended up coming up with a shape like this. And in Tlingit, we call that form a tina. It's a tina. And it's Atna Tina. It's from an Athabascan group of people. So the Tlingit and Athabascan people came together. So it's an Atna Tina. And he made several of these shields. And these are just small replicas of the big shield. They were actually 3-4 feet in height. And when he came back down into the village, he gave them to the chiefs. And what they ended up becoming their dana. They became their money system. So in the olden days, before having a tina, chiefs would take all their greatest belongings and they would throw them into the ocean or throw them into rivers. And whatever chief threw the most into the river were some of the most powerful chiefs, because they had so much material excess that they could get rid of it. So rather than getting rid of their beautiful frontlets and their regalia and their masks and their bracelets and all these types of heirlooms, they were given a shield that they could actually trade. So when you look at the coast of the Northwest Coast in Haida and Tlingit, Tsimshian, Nisga'a, Haisla, down into Kwakwaka'wakw territory, they have these big copper shields. They're called tenas, and it became their trading commodity. So there's a whole system of rules that actually came about in creating these copper shields, which is really why when I was talking to Renee earlier this week, he was saying, well, maybe we can do something to honor the copper and the people on the coast. And again, if you want to bring copper into the classroom, I mean, this little piece here, it's 16 gauge copper. You can actually cut it with scissors, or a nice pair of industrial scissors. It doesn't actually take too much to cut it. And then you can take a hand file and just kind of file off the ridges here. And it's just a way you can bend it around the boxes. You can cut different shapes if you want to get an artist to come in and help you. Or you can line around boxes if you want. You can bend it around. It's a nice, easy gauge. You can find it at Michael's and that kind of thing. Or maybe you can trade and barter just like we used to.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dean. That's
Yeah, no,
that's
absolutely.
Love the story too.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story. Absolutely.
Yeah.
so it's 4:20, and one other element that I wanted to at least touch on was what you can put into the planter. And again, this speaks to, kind of enriching, but also, that cognizant of the costs and so on. So I've done this with on Macmillan Island with a group and up in Kamloops, where after I left, the planting was an intentional component of the whole project. So on Macmillan Island, they planted salal, and up in Kamloops they planted sage. So I think we've got a couple of pictures. I don't know, Jordan, if you want to take a look at that. But obviously I have one of these sitting on my deck, and it has somewhat forlorn looking tomato plant in it. But you can have a much more significant element again that can help the kids connect on different levels. Yeah, so this is up in Kamloops. So you see how it really helps working in pairs. And this is the workshop that Adia was okay. And this, yeah, all right. So I don't know. There was another picture, I think, of some sage, or maybe not. Maybe that was just in the advert.
There is. It's just my computer decided to freeze inconveniently.
Oh, okay. Anyway, it was a beautiful picture that they sent afterwards. Was really, yeah, there you go. So not everyone ended up doing one of the little pieces of brass. Just timing wise, it didn't work out, and actually some of the kids had missed the day before the workshop where we did the planter, and they came in and they wanted to do some of the engraving work, and one student made the most beautiful feather on theirs, and wanted to know if they could just hang it like from their front door. And so it's always neat when you don't get too caught up in your own plan, and you give the kids a little bit of space to do their then all of a sudden that creativity gets drawn in, and beautiful things happen. So
with the 5 minutes left, the only thing I have to remember to do is the draw. I have Steve's bowl. Oh, I have Steve's bowl. Do you want to do the draw now or questions first?
Hold on. Does anybody have any questions?
That was fantastic. I really love the First Nations element to it. That makes me happy.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, absolutely.
Adia, do you have a few examples of some of your, because I know you've done you did a workshop in Burnaby, like a Pro-D workshop, where you were showing ADST teachers how to make use of just really common, easily accessible materials. Do you have any of those examples to hand? Sorry to just sort of throw that out at you at the last moment.
I don't, but it was awesome. And actually just the person who added in the chat about the wood burner, that is like, such an easy, fun, super accessible tool. You don't need a workshop. You just need like a kitchen table or something. But so I brought a couple of those to that workshop in Burnaby. And it was obviously, those are always the hit, because you can take even just a tiny little wood round from a branch or something, and you pre-drill a hole through the top, and you can burn in little trees or a design or something, or turn it into a keychain or whatever. But it's a really cool way of like getting an artsy piece that's totally finished and, kind of, it looks like something. And, for people who aren't used to doing a lot of craft stuff or wood burning or anything, it's like same as that little Dremel. It's a really fun little tool, and it's super addicting to use too. So even after that, I think I told you, Renee, one of the teachers ended up coming the following weekend to my studio tour, and she was wearing the necklace that she had made at that workshop. And she said she went out to Lee Valley and bought a wood burner for herself. So she was like, yeah, I definitely want to do it more. And she was like one of the people who was, you know, a little bit more hesitant and definitely not comfortable with any kind of woodworking stuff. So, but again, you know, you just haven't found what you're comfortable with or something fun that you can kind of see yourself doing. So
Yeah.
Yeah, can I just put in, my students here in Burnaby love wood burners. I go through them like crazy, and every project kids want a wood burn. So it's an easy addition to really customize your piece. I had 2 grade 12 students make a bench for the school, and they wood burned on top of it, and it's sitting up at the office. And now those girls are getting, they were requested to make another bench for an elementary school. And so they are wood burning up a storm before the school year ends right now. So wood burners are amazing, especially if you want to get, not to say females only, but more females like that creative outlet. So wood burners are a huge, huge hit for every grade. So buy them.
Mhm.
Great. Thank you. That's every time we do this, there's a whole another realm that that gets added in. That's really neat.
Just before we go, I'd like to put it out to Randy and some of the other teachers. From what I'm gathering from you guys is that we should kind of go and push the issue regarding Cedar in the schools, because basically in 63 and 61, it's been a kind of a no-go zone for so long. And you're saying that we should pursue it and say other people are using it. Is that the case?
Well,
Each school district's unique, so one of the best things is to sort of look at what is the problem with using the red cedar and then just tackle that. So if people feel that it's the dust, then you just take the dust out in an outside environment. I mean, we're in a pandemic right now where airborne disease is traveling around. We've learned pretty quickly to wear a mask. I mean, even these little masks right here would probably work just fine in the school, and they're not expensive, and there's millions of them around now. But just trying to stay away from a bit of the sanding stuff, like wood burning, a little bit of the carving and chipping.
Yep.
And I didn't see Adia use any sandpaper on that project. So all of you are just handling it. And people who've got yellow or red cedar on their fences, on their decks and everywhere. We just need to educate our school districts so that there's nothing wrong with using cedar. Been used for centuries, right, Dean? It's been used for centuries.
Yeah.
No, I agree. There's so much you can do with cedar, and luckily here on the island, it's quite accessible for a good price. So thanks, Randy.
yeah, that's something I always say too, with a lot of different woods. It's not just cedar, but with the dust and stuff, you know, it's not all harmless. You know, you do have to be a little bit smart about it, but even just, you know, I always suggest washing your hands after. It's a super easy thing, but obviously you don't eat or do anything else, but just washing your hands after working with wood, because the dust, some people are more sensitive and you can get rashes or different things. But I think that, you know, of course, cedar can be a little bit more susceptible, but just with any kind of wood dust and stuff like that, it's just a good practice. And, you know, now it's such an easy sell too, because it should just be, you know, part of our routine by this point. But yeah, just keeping that in mind too. It's a good point.
Perfect. Well, so I have the bowl, and we're not going to shut the Zoom down. So if people want to hang out, please do. But I know others may not. And Cassandra, sorry for not spotlighting your video. As you were speaking, I was trying to figure out who it was, and then it was too late. And then, but yeah. So thanks for the wood burning comment as well. So I put everybody's name in here except people who were either working for us or related to me. And no one else is around in the pandemic to pick, so I'm going to do this blindly. I didn't use sticky notes this time, so you should be good. And it looks, I got 2 anyways. So Doug, we'll be sending you a Lee Valley gift card. Thanks for joining us today. I know everybody was just here for the gift card and not the content.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
I didn't know
Believe
there
it,
was one.
believe it or not, this is the first thing I've ever won in my entire life.
Oh, well, I
Ever.
feel privileged to be a part of history.
We're breaking down barriers here.
I'm gonna go buy some lottery tickets on the way home now. Thanks.
Yeah, please do. The other thing I'm going to do is,
Oh, but you got to share that one.
yeah,
You got to share the lottery.
yeah. If you win, we all get a piece of that, right? You can split it 19 ways.
It's karma. You got to do it.
The other thing, we didn't do this after the last session. I did send an email out, but apparently not everybody got it. So we're going to put a survey link in the chat. Just if you have ideas of how we can make these better, or if you have ideas for future webinars, please throw it in there. It has a star function too, which is helping us get a sense of whether or not you're going to take this into your classroom or if it's relevant for your school. Yeah, and so we're not going to do any in the summer, it looks like, because people have priorities, but we're coming back in the fall, and we'll probably do at least one a month throughout September through to the rest of the year. The other thing we are going to do, just so you know, for those who are curious, Dean mentioned the book, so this is what it looks like, background and everything. We have copies printed, and they're going to be distributed to First Nation schools first, and then what we have left is already being stolen from our office by our staff members. So we're going to have to order some more. But you will be able to see that online, as well as Dean's videos are on our YouTube channel if you wanted to explore that. And we do really highly encourage you to reach out to him if you have questions around where to get started with engaging in your community or your school community. As well, I did want to highlight that it wasn't an accident that we chose two artists to present today. One of the things that is really key is being able to find a way of engaging in people where they're at. So a lot of the stuff that we're finding is around self-expression, as I'm sure you as educators know, that anytime we can tap into a bit of self-expression through some tools, that's great. But I also would highly encourage you to check out what Adia does, because this is her self-employed living, and it's pretty amazing. She also has been pretty incredible with kids when she's gone out and done workshops with us. So definitely reach out to Renee if that's what you're looking at in the fall. But yeah, I'm going to stop recording now so that you can fully heckle us without record. And yeah.